On today's show, the Rockets make not one, but two signings via NBA free agency, adding another premier 3-and-D wing in Dorian Finney-Smith and reuniting with their old big man, Clint Capela. What these two signings tell us about the direction of the team moving forward and so much more. It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
The Rockets have been stacking W's all off season long, and that trend continues into NBA free agency, where they make not one, but two additions to the roster. What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Thursdays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts, or on YouTube, just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. Now, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Just head on over to FanDuel.com to check them out. And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being an everydayer. Rockets add Dorian Finney-Smith and reunite with their ex-big man, Clint Capela, in 2025 NBA free agency. The DFS signing was reported. We kind of expected that one. It fits, what we expect out of an Ime Udoka-led team. He fits the defensive identity, all that good stuff. And we're going to get into the specifics of both these signings. The Clint Capela one was so random. Like, what? Even my reaction was like, my immediate reaction, and many others' immediate reaction to the Clint Capela signing was like, are they about to go get Giannis? Like, that's kind of what it felt like for a split second. And then I had to temper my expectations. And after doing some poking around, I was able to basically confirm this is a depth play by signing Clint Capela. That's what this is the Rockets, and this is what they're signifying. They want to be a deep team. They want to have plenty of viable options and lineup and roster flexibility at every single position across the board. So makes sense, but it was still a shocking signing nonetheless. We're going to get into the specifics of what each of these signings tell us about the direction of the team moving forward, major takeaways, thoughts, possible concerns, all that good stuff. But let's just start with the raw contract numbers and just the general reaction. So first off, Dorian Finney-Smith, Rockets stealing him away from the LA Lakers and LeBron and Luka. I'm sure Luka is heartbroken that he only had Dorian Finney-Smith back for, half a season, and now he loses him once again. But Dorian Finney-Smith, 4 years, $53 million deal, non-guaranteed salary, and a player option in year 4, plus a trade kicker. So overall, really fair value for DFS. I think his first year is going to clock in at just a skosh over $12 million. And with how the salary cap is going to continue to increase, roughly 10% each subsequent season from here on out, that $12 million salary, approximately $12 million per year. It'll have increasing raises here and there. It's going to be great value over the lifetime of the contract for DFS. And that final year being non-guaranteed salary and a player option bodes really well for Houston. So overall, great value there. And then the Clint Capela deal. 3 years, $21.5 million. So year 1, he'll clock in making about $6.9 million, give or take. Nice. And that was the one that was super perplexing, where a lot of people were like, whoa, what does the Clint Capela signing mean and all this stuff? The Rockets are getting Dorian Finney-Smith. They're signing him outright using their non-taxpayer mid-level exception. They're using most of it. Again, about 12 million of the 14.1 available, 14.1 million available dollars from the non-tax mid-level exception that they had. And then they're getting Clint Capela via sign and trade. and they're not sending anything out to the Atlanta Hawks except for a future protected second-round pick and some cash. So the Rockets had a cash allotment left over from this past season. Each year, NBA teams get X amount of cash they can throw around in trades, grease the wheels on transactions, all that stuff. And so the Rockets are receiving Clint Capela in a sign-and-trade deal with the Atlanta Hawks. It hasn't been formally executed yet, and there's a strong likelihood that it's going to get rolled into the existing framework of the Kevin Durant trade in order to make the money like truly work across all sides. At least that's the working assumption in the immediate aftermath of the signing. Now, things could change on that front, but as it stands right now, Rockets get DFS with the mid-level, the non-taxpayer mid-level exception, and they get Clint Capela via sign and trade from the Atlanta Hawks, but they are not sending out any pieces for either of these guys. And it looks like in all likelihood that Jock Landale will ultimately just get waived. I don't think Jock Landale is going back to Atlanta for Clint Capela. At least it doesn't seem like that's the outcome of his situation. It looks like he'll probably just get waived so that the Rockets have full access to that non-taxpayer mid-level exception to be able to sign DFS. And then one of the big hangups with these two signings, and my reaction to these two signings, was the concern, the worry. Initially we were operating under the assumption that the Rockets would likely be trying to stay below the luxury tax line this year and going into this upcoming season. Instead, the Rockets said, screw that, and they just went all out. They secured DFS. He's making $12 million on his first year in Houston, and then Clint Capela reuniting with the Rockets. He'll be making $6.9 million. The Rockets clock in at just below the first apron currently, with the way things are shaking out financially. And one of the major concerns with not one, but these two free agency additions was that it meant Cam Whitmore would be getting traded, that Cam Whitmore would be long gone, that he would have to be the return piece in either a sign and trade for one of these two guys, or the Rockets would just have to jettison him for some future draft capital in order to make some space on the roster. After reaching out and talking to a source close to the team, that is not the scenario that they presented. In fact, there's optimism here in their ability to keep Cam Whitmore around in addition to these two reported signings. And that's huge. The Rockets could simply just go in there and cut Nate Williams, and because Nate right now is kind of their 15th man on the roster. Again, you don't have to have 15 players on the roster. You can just have 14 going into the season. That's fine. And if they do that, if they cut Nate Williams and keep Cam Whitmore and all the other pieces stay the same, the Rockets will clock in just below the first apron threshold, which is where they are currently hard capped. The Rockets cannot go into or past that first apron number because of the fact that they spent more than the taxpayer mid-level exception. Because they signed Dorian Finney-Smith using 12 of the available $14.1 million of that non-tax mid-level exception, the Rockets are hard capped at the first apron. They literally cannot go over that number. And also because they are receiving a player back in a sign and trade via Clint Capela. So that's also another factor to consider there. But some fantastic kind of cap logistics or cap gymnastics, I should say, from the Rockets front office. And one of the signifying things of these two deals is that, like, the Rockets are hitting full send. They're going for it, right? There's no, hey, we're going to skirt the luxury tax a little bit, and then we're worried about the repeater tax somewhere down the line. It's no, they want to go for it this season, and they wanted to arm themselves and be in the best possible position to make a deep run this season. And one thing that we learned from this past season and this past playoff run is that the deepest teams have the most success at the end of the day. And adding Dorian Finney-Smith, again, another premier 3-and-D wing, and then adding Clint Capela, who effectively now becomes your third string center behind Alperen Sengun and Steven Adams. Those are fantastic depth additions to this Rockets roster that allow them to play a variety of ways, right? The Rockets have so many wings. They can play a uber elite defensive version of small ball with Amen Thompson and Dorian Finney-Smith and Tari Eason and Kevin Durant and Jabari Smith Jr. Super switchability across all 5 positions, or they can go super jumbo mega big lineup, right? With Jabari and KD and Sengun and Adams or Capela out there. They've got so much optionality as to how they're going to be able to play this next season. And that's the really exciting part about both of these signings. So coming up, I want to get into some of the specifics of each of these signings, what some of these signings tell us about the direction of the team moving forward. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are busy getting sunburned at the beach. Look, using FanDuel to track your favorite matchups is awesome. The app keeps it fresh with new daily promotions and fun ways to bet. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. Head on over to FanDuel.com right now. Take a look at the odds-on favorites to win the World Series this season. The Dodgers leading the way at plus 210. The Yankees plus 700. The Phillies and Tigers both sitting there at plus 850. And your Houston Astros clocking in at plus 1100 to win it all this season. If you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Again, that's $150 if your first $5 bet wins. Just head on over to FanDuel.com, open the app, or head to the website to get started today. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, let's take a look at what the Dorian Finney-Smith signing tells us about this team moving forward. So first and foremost, right, the Rockets, there was some reporting that the Rockets were looking at targeting a veteran kind of 3-and-D wing to replace Dillon Brooks in the rotation. That was unfortunately, it was a significant loss for the Rockets. I've seen a lot of fans kind of trying to glaze over the impact that Dillon Brooks had on this team this past season. Now, a big part of the two key differences between DFS and Dillon Brooks, I think they are fully, they're comparable defenders. In fact, I'd give DFS a slight edge when it comes to guarding down, as I'll call it, guarding smaller players, smaller, quicker, faster players. That was an area of struggle for Dillon Brooks. Dillon's best, roles, the best way that he was being deployed defensively oftentimes was when Dillon was guarding up, when he was guarding bigger players defensively. I mean, think about the times that he was cross-matched on 4s and 5s, or even using him situationally to guard guys like Victor Wembanyama, leveraging his strength and his physicality as a defender, which were some of his best attributes. But Dillon Brooks would also routinely get, exposed by smaller, quicker, more explosive guard play. Even when you have Amen Thompson, who's a much more adept guard defender, guarding smaller, quicker, faster players. So I think DFS gives the Rockets another wing defender who's a little bit better when it comes to checking guards. So now they've got Amen Thompson as your ace defender. You've got DFS backing him up. You've got Fred VanVleet, who's still a phenomenal defender in his own right. And so you got 2 of those 3 guys in your starting lineup. And then you've got your wing defenders, your true wing defenders in Jabari Smith Jr., Kevin Durant, and Tari Eason. And then a little bit further down the line, right, as part of your, stay ready crew, your reserves, you've got Jayshawn Tate. So the Rockets have 3 kind of really strong point of attack defenders in Amen Thompson, DFS, and Fred VanVleet. And then they've got their 3 lengthier, bigger, stronger wing defenders in Jabari Smith Jr., Kevin Durant, and Tari Eason. I think that's a really nice balance between those 2 kind of roles of defenders, if you will. Whereas last season, at times, it felt like, a lot of the burden of chasing around the smaller, quicker players really did fall on Amen Thompson, Fred VanVleet, and to a lesser degree, Jalen Green at times. I mean, we watched Jalen Green chase around Steph Curry, in that Warrior series. And it oftentimes felt like Jalen was the best defender on Steph outside of Amen Thompson and Fred VanVleet. So that's an underrated part of this signing as well, is DFS gives them another point of attack defender, another true kind of perimeter guy that can chase around other smaller perimeter players. That way it doesn't have to be Jabari or KD or Tari chasing around guards on the perimeter. So that's part one of what I think the DFS signing, brings to the Rockets. One other thing is, when you compare DFS and Dillon Brooks, I give DFS the edge there defensively because I think he's better at guarding smaller, quicker players. Dillon Brooks, no contest, is a better offensive player than DFS. Like, far and away the better offensive player. But the trade-off in what you get, because the Rockets have effectively now replaced Jalen Green with Kevin Durant, and then Dillon Brooks with Dorian Finney-Smith, and then Jock Landale with Clint Capela. And that's kind of the major moves that they've made this offseason. What I will say is, even though DFS is not quite the overall well-rounded offensive player or has maybe the bag that Dillon Brooks does, the Dillon Brooks bailout offense that we saw a lot this past season, right, where Dillon Brooks would, take the ball and get to his little mid-range Jimmy or, post up against mismatches against smaller players. It was fun. It was nice to see, but it was also frustrating when it wasn't working or when Dillon didn't quite have it going. And the Rockets, they don't need that anymore. They've, I think, outgrown the need for that type of play, because now if there's ever a broken half-court play, if they're struggling to find offense, right, if things aren't going their way, that's what Kevin Durant is for now, right? Dillon Brooks would score some of his baskets last season out of broken plays, sets that didn't work out, blown up offensive stuff. Like, that's KD's role now. Is KD's going to get 20 to 25 shot attempts a game, basically, as the Rockets' number one option, but also as the guy that they go to when things do break down, when they command a double team, and then when they just need to just throw it out and there's less than 10 seconds left on the clock and they need a bucket. There's no more, the ball's going to find Dillon Brooks and then Dillon is going to try to make something happen. It's like, no, get the ball to KD and he'll take care of you. So I don't think the offensive loss is that big of a deal. The one major reservation that I have about DFS is he actually a good shooter? And I say that because you look at his last handful of seasons. So with the Lakers this past season, he shot just under 40% from three on 4.8 attempts per game. In Brooklyn this past season, because he spent half and half, he shot 43.5% on 5.4 attempts per game. That's great. So combined, he was shooting 41.1% this past year with both teams. With Brooklyn the season before, so the entire 22-23 season, he was only shooting 34.8% on threes. And then the year before that, both Dallas and Brooklyn combined, he was shooting 33.7% on threes. And that includes playing alongside Luka before they traded him for Kyrie Irving. Now, in the years before the Brooklyn trade, he was at 39.5%, 39.4%, 37.6%. So I do think that DFS probably trends more likely a good shooter, but there have been some slumps in his career. However, those have kind of directly coincided with the Brooklyn Nets that weren't winning much of anything, if at all, when they gave up on the KD Kyrie experiment and everything. So I'm not going to hold that too much against him, but it's tough when you go from Dillon Brooks, who was literally the team's best shooter, to DFS, who does have, some hiccups, on his resume as a shooter. Ultimately, I'm going to trust that DFS is a legitimate shooter, that he will be a knockdown, spot-up three-point shooter. And I think he's going to really excel in his role here in Houston. The identity of this team, right? So much of the offensive attention is going to be focused on Kevin Durant, Alperen Sengun, and Amen Thompson as like your big three. And all three of those guys are able to command double teams, whether it's operating in isolation, operating out of the post, getting downhill. There will be countless opportunities for DFS to just be spotting up on the three-point line, knocking down wide open shots. And he's also not just like a one-dimensional, only can spot up and knock down threes. He can attack off the catch a little bit. He can drive it in. He can finish at the rim. He's a decent cutter, moves well without the basketball. He's played off of star players like Luka, like LeBron previously in his career. So he'll fit in just fine in Houston. One more important note here about the DFS signing. I think this is significant to mention. I think the DFS signing fully signals, because we speculated about what the Rockets may or may not do in free agency, their potential glaring need for one more, maybe combo guard or secondary ball handler to take some of the pressure off of Fred VanVleet, Amen Thompson, and Reed Sheppard. Ultimately, they didn't go that route. And they added 2 names. They didn't just add 1 name. They added 2 names, mind you. Now, granted, the Capela one is a sign and trade from Atlanta. So that requires Atlanta's cooperation. It's not like they could just go out and, add another $7 million in free agency. That's not how that works. But that being said, I think the fact that the Rockets signed Dorian Finney-Smith is a massive vote of confidence for Reed Sheppard and by extension, Fred VanVleet and Amen Thompson too, because it signals that the Rockets really believe in that trio as their trio of ball handlers moving forward, that's the trio of guys who are going to be initiating a lot of the Rockets offense. Now, obviously, look, Alperen Sengun is going to be responsible for initiating offense. Kevin Durant, the offense will run through him a lot this next season, but your 3 primary ball handlers next year are going to be Fred VanVleet, Amen Thompson, and Reed Sheppard. And that tells me that the Rockets truly believe that Reed Sheppard's going to be ready for that role. Now, you also have, right, in the stay ready crew, you've got Aaron Holiday kind of waiting in the wings, and, he can give you some spot minutes and some decent ball handling here and there. But he's not, at least on paper, on the same level as those other 3 guys. And he's not really a guy you want initiating a lot of your offense. He's more of a, plug him in at the guard spot, let him defend, let him spot up at the 3-point line while you let other guys run the offense. So I think that's important to note here. And I think it tells us a lot about how confident the Rockets are in Reed Sheppard. And again, by extension, Fred VanVleet and Amen Thompson moving forward with their kind of collective responsibilities offensively for this team. Coming up, I want to talk about Clint Capela's surprise addition to this squad, what it means moving forward, and final thoughts on Rockets free agency day 1. We're going to get there in just one moment. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. One more quick note about DFS. I don't expect him to start. I think that there was some speculation about that. And I mean, I could maybe see it, right? Because you have a little bit more of a balanced starting lineup. If you start DFS, you have Amen at the 3, KD at the 4, Sengun at the 5. And maybe there will be some nights where situationally, like against a smaller team, a more guard-heavy team, maybe they would elect to do that. But I think the Rockets' default starting lineup next season will likely be Fred, Amen, KD, Jabari, Sengun. And for what it's worth, right, the Rockets definitely view KD, at least offensively, as their 2 guard. He'll be the guy leading the team in shot attempts. He'll be the number 1 option offensively. So if you want to restructure that in your mind, it's Fred, KD at the 2, Amen at the 3, Jabari at the 4, Sengun at the 5. And then defensively, that lineup still has a ton of versatility. And you've got 2 guards in Amen, who will take the toughest defensive assignment, and then Fred VanVleet to guard the smaller players on the floor before you have to worry about Jabari and KD stepping into guard, like, these 6 foot tall, quick twitch guards on the perimeter. And even then, their length, their overall defensive versatility, they should be fine. Just wanted to address that really quickly. I fully expect Jabari to still be starting this next season. Let's talk a little bit about Clint Capela. The prodigal son returns to the Houston Rockets. Kind of crazy that he, had his rookie year in Houston, didn't play much. Then he played like 5 really good seasons in Houston, got traded to Atlanta, played 5 really good years in Atlanta. Maybe like 4 really good years in like that last season where he lost his starting job to Onyeka Okongwu and, was in a reduced role coming off the bench. Clint's a little long in the tooth now, unfortunately, but Clint gives the Rockets another kind of insurance policy with that, in that 3rd string big role. He's effectively replacing Jock Landale on the roster. And I will say, look, when Clint was first signed, I was very confused. So were many others. I was like, what is happening? And my immediate reaction to it was, are they getting Giannis? Like that was that. And I did some poking, I did some digging around, and no, this is just, it's a depth play. The Rockets basically had an opportunity to, again, add another, depth piece via Atlanta, via sign and trade, to bolster the roster, and knowing that they were going to have to be, waiving Jock Landale in order to open up the cap space to effectively sign Dorian Finney-Smith, this was a way for the Rockets to get that third string big, because you got to remember, Jock Landale played a not insignificant role on this team this past season, right? Because Steven Adams wasn't fully ready to go at the start of the year. He didn't fully look like himself. He wasn't playing back-to-backs for a majority of the season. And that's the role that Jock Landale held for this Rockets team. Now, unfortunately, Jock Landale was clearly like the third worst big, or the third best big. The third string big. God, that's so rude of me to have. Why did I have to say it that way? Anyways, Jock was just the third center, the third best center on the roster. And there wasn't anything that Jock did that was truly noteworthy, other than he could space the floor a little bit at the 5, but he wasn't a knockdown 3-point shooter or a traditional stretch 5 by any means. He'd knock down threes occasionally. But he was your prototypical kind of hustle big coming off the bench. Come in, play hard, try to hustle, set some good screens, rebound, do the dirty work. But he wasn't this elite, monstrous rebounding presence like Steven Adams, or elite screening presence. He wasn't skilled, as a passer or as a scorer like Alperen Sengun. And so he was just kind of there, right? He was a spot filler. He was an innings eater when Adams couldn't play. Clint Capela gives you that same role, but he actually gives you some versatility out of that 5 spot, because now the Rockets have a tried and true vertical floor spacing big. They have a oh my god, where is it? Do I have it here? There it is.
Lob threat.
They have a lob threat once again. Now N'Faly Dante did project to be a lob threat, and some might ask, well, why couldn't the Rockets just trust N'Faly Dante to be that third string big and whatever? Clearly they wanted somebody who's a little bit more of a proven commodity, and given the fact that they want to preserve Steven Adams for the postseason, this isn't really surprising. This allows the Rockets to still run the double big lineup pretty consistently with Sengun and Adams on the nights that Adams is available. But maybe Adams is, if he misses any time, or if they still want to be careful with him and not play him on back-to-backs, this allows the Rockets another look at playing that double big lineup potentially with Alperen Sengun and Clint Capela in the middle instead. And it's a different dynamic, because now you have Clint Capela who can absolutely play over the rim. And you can just have Clint Capela in the dunker spot. You can have Alperen Sengun as the primary screener. And, you get Fred or Amen Thompson going downhill with that screen from Al P. They get the ball, over the top to Sengun on the short roll. And then the defense is in a bind, because what do? Do you stop Alperen Sengun? Do you help in off the wings from the shooters, which are, Kevin Durant, Jabari Smith Jr., DFS, maybe Cam Whitmore, Tari, Eason? Or do you help from the dunker spot and then give up a wide open lob pass to Clint Capela? There's a lot of fun ways that the Rockets can play this. They can also just play Clint Capela by himself. He's an athletic rim running big, still a good rebounder, still a solid defender. Maybe not, a starting caliber big anymore. Although I'm sure the Lakers would have loved to get their hands on Clint Capela. So another win for the Rockets and another loss for the Lakers, which we love. We always love talking about Lakers L's. It's just another great depth addition for this Rockets team, where now you look at their depth chart. The Rockets have a starting lineup of Fred VanVleet, Amen Thompson, Jabari Smith Jr., Kevin Durant, Alperen Sengun. Flip KD and Jabari if you're going to get into semantics. Off their bench, they've got Reed Sheppard, Cam Whitmore, Dorian Finney-Smith, Tari Eason, Steven Adams. And then their reserves backing up those guys as it presently stands. Aaron Holiday. I'm not going to factor in Nate Williams because he's probably going to get cut, waived, whatever. So Aaron Holiday, Jayshawn Tate, Uncle Jeff Green, and Clint Capela. That is a ridiculously deep 14-man roster where every single one of those players could actually still be a legitimate 9 or 10th man rotation guy across the NBA landscape. The Rockets basically have 3 different versions of lineups that are serviceable NBA quality lineups, where you don't have a bunch of reserves that unproven rookies or young players or guys that are too long in the tooth to still contribute, motivational support guys at the end of the bench. No, Holiday, Tate, even Jeff Green to a lesser extent. These guys, the Stay Ready crew, they absolutely still contributed this past season. Now you add Clint Capela to that mix, basically replacing Jock Landale in the Stay Ready crew. And he gives them, again, another look at that 5 spot. You get DFS, another wing defender. The Rockets have just flat out crushed free agency. And assuming, knock on wood, fingers crossed, all that good stuff, light your sage, your incense, assuming that they're able to still keep Cam Whitmore, this is an A++ offseason from Rafael Stone, Eli Whitus, Patrick Fertitta, and the rest of the Rockets front office. That brain trust has done a phenomenal job setting this team up to put them in position to contend for a title right away. They've got depth. They've got defense. They are going to be a much better offensive team this next season, simply with the addition of Kevin Durant, but also you're going to be a better shooting team, assuming bigger roles for Reed Sheppard and hopefully Cam Whitmore. Dorian Finney-Smith, also a phenomenal shooter on paper. Continued growth for Alperen Sengun and Amen Thompson, right? They'll have much more clearly defined roles offensively this next season, with, the number one option being Kevin Durant, and then Alperen Sengun and Amen Thompson taking turns as kind of the second and third options, depending on who's got it going on what night or favorable matchups or what have you. Fred VanVleet gets, back into his ideal role as like a fourth or even fifth option some nights, where he's just kind of setting the table offensively and letting the other guys go to work. Hopefully Jabari Smith Jr. has a bigger role offensively this next season as well. There's a lot to be excited about, a lot to look forward to. Great pair of signings for the Rockets. And yeah, man, I guess at this point, Rafael Stone just gets to go on vacation until the season starts up again, because there's nothing left to do. Rockets are done. They're done making moves, unless somehow Giannis demands a trade and then the Rockets want to be at the front, front of the Giannis sweepstakes line. Aside from that, this team is ready to contend at the highest level right now. I think the Rockets flat out crushed this offseason. And I think you got to look at, they flat out destroyed free agency, best free agency signings across the board. Maybe the Nuggets, maybe the Hawks. We'll circle back and kind of do an overall evaluation of free agency at some point a little later in the week, once everybody else's moves are taken care of. I like what Denver did. I really like what the Hawks have done. Hawks are about to give the East a run for their money here. But with that, I want your reactions, your thoughts to the signings of Dorian Finney-Smith and Clint Capela. Give me your thoughts in the YouTube comments. Remember, the best way to help us grow the show is to listen every single day, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.